right. Afternoon, folks. Good morning, depending where you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get started in about 2 minutes here, but starting to see some folks trickle in. Yeah, we should be getting started right around noon Eastern, 9 a.m. So looking forward to speaking with everybody.
Great. And while we wait, feel free to drop a quick hello in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from today. As for me, I'm broadcasting live from beautiful PEI in the east coast of Canada, where it's a fairly overcast day, unfortunately. We'll get some sun later, though.
Thank you, Alec. And I am from Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada. It is a real place with real houses and human beings, folks, not just a tourist attraction. It is currently sitting at 21 degrees Celsius. Hi, Amber from Green Bay. Thanks for joining us. Alrighty, folks. So let's we'll give it the 1 minute warning here for a few more folks to trickle in, and we will get started. Stephen from Santa Barbara, nice and warm, I'm guessing.
All right, Sean, I think let's get started. So thanks everyone here who's attending so much for carving out time in your schedule to join us, whether you're coming from the FunctionFox or Function Point side of the family. We're thrilled to welcome you to this thought leadership webinar. My name is Alec. I'm one of the moderators for today's session. I'm the product specialist here at Function Software, focused on the Function Point platform. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm speaking to you from the East Coast of Canada. Joining me today is my colleague, Sean Harris, Director of Customer Experience at Function Software. Sean, how are you doing?
No complaints on this side, Alec. From Niagara Falls, Ontario, folks, and really just happy to be here today.
Well, sounds good. I think before we get into the agenda, just some quick housekeeping here. We, of course, welcome your questions throughout the session. The note that today's format is a moderated discussion between Sean, myself, and our guest panelists. However, we have set aside some dedicated Q&A time near the end to bubble up any questions that you've submitted to our panel. And of course, if we don't get to your question live, we will follow up by email. And then lastly, general reminder, today's webinar is being recorded. You should receive a link to the recording after the session, and it will also appear on our YouTube channel over the next few days. And that's it from me. Sean, over to you.
Awesome, Alec. Thank you so much. So again, folks, thank you so much for joining us today. This should be a fairly lively and more importantly, practical session for everybody. So really, folks, this is about retainers and resourcing today. Whether you're a seasoned agency leader or if you're navigating the first roller coaster of unpredictable workloads, this is the right place for you. So what we're going to be diving into today are really those two topics that can help to make or break an agency. And that is really smart and scalable retainers, and then managing your most precious and expensive resource, which is your team. So we're going to be breaking down how retainers can bring consistency to your client relationships. And then we're going to be talking about how to make sure your team isn't operating in that sort of panic mode 24/7 from not really having an insight into resourcing. After that, we do, like Alec mentioned, we do have some open time at the end for Q&A with our two amazing panelists. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce them to you now. So today on the panel, folks, we have Donna Lynn Johnson, founder of Agents 8. Donna's a fractional CFO and an agency management and tech consultant, also a dog lover. Donna Lynn, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Perfect. And we also have Craig Cardellino, who is the Director of Marketing Operations at TRG Multimedia. Folks, if you were here with us for the last Thought Leadership webinar we did, Craig was one of our panelists there. I'm always very happy to have any bit of his time. So Craig, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for putting this on. And of course, as always, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right, folks. Well, we've got a lot to cover today, so let's just go ahead and dive right into it. So we're going to jump into retainers first. You can see from the top of the slide here, the feast and famine trap. This probably looks very familiar to a lot of folks. So within the industry itself, 1 month, your team can be absolutely buried in deadlines, and you're considering building a nap room under someone's desk. I know I may or may not have done that before myself. The next, you're potentially staring at your inbox, wondering if some old client might suddenly need a full rebrand. That's the feast and famine cycle, and honestly, it's more than just annoying. It can end up being very unsustainable. That type of volatility really does start to burn teams out and break budgets, and it makes forecasting nearly impossible, which, in today's macroeconomic environment, the risk that we really can't afford to take. Retainers are there to help even out those highs and lows. The whole point is to create that consistency, and just as important, they're going to let you plan. So ideally, there's no more staffing on vibes. The kids love to say. So really, that's one of the main things that we're going to be going into today. Throughout the course of this, folks, we are going to be putting some questions to the panel. So I'm going to put the first one out there to either Craig or Donna Lang. Folks, have either of you ever had to restructure a business model to reduce that revenue volatility? And if so, I guess what was that aha moment for you?
I have actually. And obviously, I'm an agency consultant, and so as the economics change periodically, we don't know anything about that, do we? One sector of the business usually has more money than the other, whether it be an in-house or a large agency, a mid-size or a small project shop. And candidly, depending on what the economic situation is, I would figure out who is actually doing well in that particular economic climate, and then I would target marketing to that group.
Fantastic. So again, folks, that's exactly what we're hoping for today. Just really these bits of practical advice from folks that have seen, if not at all, most of it. Craig, any comments on your side? Anytime that you've had to possibly work through this?
Yeah, absolutely. We have so for those who don't know much about TRG, which is probably most of you, we are a production studio. So we're not a typical ad agency. We are the production side of executing your multimedia content. So a lot of the things that we do is not a typical retainer, but more of guaranteed spends and those types of agreements that will do exactly what this does, is kind of even out the unpredictable revenue of too much work and not enough work. So in those cases, yes, we've absolutely experienced having crazy months and then a month where it seems like there's not enough. And what we've done with some of these agreements that we have that, I'll certainly go into more detail in a little bit, is evening out. The purpose is just to even out that revenue across the year.
Awesome. Craig, thank you so much. Very much appreciated. All right, folks. So, sort of getting into that, evening out that revenue, right? One thing that we see time and time again is that, in terms of reframing this, that retainer really isn't just a billing structure. It's definitely a mindset shift, right? So what you're trying to do is get to that point where you've been able to even out not only that revenue, but also that cognitive and workload in general, right? Instead of chasing those projects, what you're really doing is you're building that partnership. When you do it right, the client doesn't really see you as a service provider anymore. You really become part of their strategy, part of their team. The benefits definitely go both ways when we see these work well. It's predictable income for you, predictable service for them, gives your team a chance to breathe, and your ops lead, i.e. me oftentimes here, I'm not crying into a Gantt chart, right? Everyone loves their Gantt charts. So that's really the whole point of this, folks. Like, when you have a retainer that's set up correctly, and we are going to be going through some of those models, everybody wins, right? You basically do the shift from being in firefighting mode to forecasting mode. So speaking of that, folks, Alec, who is far more intelligent than I am when it comes to this stuff, he's going to run us through a few of the most common retainer models that we see being most successful. Alec, take it away, my friend.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure as we've all encountered, there's no single right answer when it comes to retainer structure. So your model should fit the client relationship, not the other way around. And let's talk about some typical retainer models. So we've got time-based retainers. So clients pre-buy hours. It's going to be flexible, but only work if time tracking is solid. We've got delivery-based or deliverables-based. These are ideal for ongoing creative output, but we want to watch for revision overload if scope isn't clear. And then access-based. So these are best when clients are valuing your expertise. So you're kind of part strategist, part executor, but it needs clear boundaries. So I think this sets up an interesting question to our panel, which is, do you use a consistent retainer model across clients or tailor it based on the relationship? Maybe this time, Craig, if we want to start with you.
Yeah, tailored based on the relationship and the client. Absolutely. Everybody has different needs. Everybody has different wants. They have different budgets. There's just so many variables, I guess, into uh, each of these different clients and each of these different relationships. So we will cater them specifically to what they need, specifically to what their budget is. And like I said, before, a lot of our retainer is kind of the time-based model in that over the next year, you're going to be spending a certain amount of money with us. And if you can guarantee that certain level of money that you're going to spend, whether it's month by month or whether it's lumped into certain areas, what we can do is with that plan, we can be a lot more efficient in what we can provide you. So we can get you more, we can get it for less, we can do bulk discounts across the board. And let's say if you're going to spend X amount, we're going to cut 15% off the top. And because we can expect that, we can be more efficient into what we provide for you. So, if you are thinking that a retainer might be a little bit more, it might be a little bit more advantageous to the agency, you can say it's not really advantageous. It allows us to plan our year accordingly and be able to provide you more for what we would typically do if we don't have that plan in place.
Interesting, Craig. Donna Lynn, do you have any thoughts on this one as well?
The other piece to that, I agree with Craig. The other piece to that is, I always say, we are reactive because we like to be. So if we're 70% reactive, 70% proactive and 30% reactive, it's a more economic and more friendlier relationship with that client. You know what I'm saying? You're setting the tone by following this particular model that Craig just described. We're not always in jump mode. So I think that's good.
Well, speaking of models, I have a follow-up question here, which is, have we learned any hard lessons from getting the model wrong? If either of you have any insight to offer there.
Getting the model wrong, I don't know if we've really gotten the model wrong per se. I think there's just times we've had to kind of reassess, but really when we're kind of figuring out what the numbers are going to look like, whether they go over doesn't really matter so much to us because we would just pivot. It's all project based, so we're not locked into a certain amount per month, and then maybe that's not enough or maybe that's too much. We are looking at an annual spend and we're saying, okay, well, if this is what you're going to spend annually, you can eat that up and then be done, but we will gladly continue the relationship, gladly continue that. So I guess getting it wrong isn't necessarily the way we think of it. It's just pivoting into, it's going to change a little bit. And based on that change, we can pivot to accommodate.
Interesting approach. And I'd be curious to open this up to the attendees at large. If you want to post something in the chat, but any lessons that you've learned through managing retainers with your clients. Anything insightful to offer, we can bring that up to the whole group at the end of our call here. For now, let's jump ahead. Talking about packaging retainers that your clients actually want. So no client dreams of buying a retainer. They want results, they want consistency, fewer surprises. We're not selling time, we're selling outcomes. So you want to start with your core services and package them into clear tiers. So think of like a starter tier, tactical execution, pro, perhaps being content and strategy, enterprise being full integration and analytics. Bit of a pro tip here, which is introducing a high-priced anchor tier to make your mid-tier feel more like high value, and above all, keep it focused. If you're offering what you're offering looks like a Cheesecake Factory menu, that's kind of the joke here, then you'll confuse the client and yourself. I think we'll save any other questions on this one for the end here. So we'll let Sean jump in with the next slide here.
Awesome. Thanks, Alec. Much appreciated. Honestly, here's another thing that we see consistently from customers. It's always a joke that I used to make about SaaS software in general as well. So definitely some parallels there. But it's that whole gym membership vibe, right? A lot of people, and I did see a couple questions in the chat about this as well, but a lot of people sort of get the impression that selling a retainer is kind of similar to a gym membership. Like people will oftentimes buy it, not end up using it. It can leave sort of a bad taste in folks' mouths. I think the trick is here, and one thing that we sort of see time and time again is, we're not trying to trap those clients into paying for those unused hours. What we're really trying to do is become the easy button for any of their recurring challenges, right? So a good line of questioning to go into is always what's inconsistent for them right now. Like, where's the time going? Where are they losing that time? Is it on approvals? Is it on internal trust? Realistically speaking, that retainer is the fix for those sort of things. I mean, if your customer is coming to you, not really understanding where that time is going, sort of having to boost spending 1 month, reduce spending the next, really that's what this retainer is meant to solve. That's the pain point. That the whole reason why we have these is to sort of even that entire piece out. Let's go ahead and we'll pop over to the next one here, which is just in terms of managing those retainers. So, again, just in terms of the actual delivery itself, we've sort of talked about the structure there. But when it comes down to actually delivering it, one thing that we sort of not necessarily joke about here, but like an interesting way to put it, retainer is very much like a piece of music, right? The best ones that are out there, they are structured, but there's always going to be a bit of room for improvisation there. I'm an old band geek, so definitely speaks to my heart there. You want to have that structure, you want to have that back line in place, so your bass player and your drummer, but you need to be able to move around a little bit. So we find the best retainers are really structured in that sort of way. There is that sort of solid consistency. But to Craig's point earlier, if you do need to pivot, you got to make sure you have a bit of that flexibility built in there. Some of the ways to accomplish that, and something that we always recommend, we do that with our own customers here, is, we do regular check-ins, just from a SaaS point of view, speaking to our customers on a regular basis, keeping engaged, finding out what's working and not working. That sort of cadence should really be built into the retainer as well, whether that be a monthly check-in, weekly check-in, whatever you think fits the bill. But we need to make sure that we're engaging in that feedback loop just to make sure that we're delivering what's been expected. Like another really important piece that oftentimes gets forgot is just the project wrap up, right? Like a lot of people will look at a retainer as, it's this continuing piece of work, which it absolutely is, but there's still going to be deliverables within that retainer. So making sure that you build in some sort of feedback mechanism where you're getting that sign off on the individual deliverables, that's going to be important as well. And that's going to help to make sure that you don't end up over servicing, which is something that we're going to get into very shortly in terms of resourcing. That being said, folks, I'm going to put this one to the panel. And Donalyn, if it's okay with you, I'm going to start with you first here.
Okay.
In terms of that over servicing, oftentimes we see that when customers drift into that do everything territory, they feel very much beholden to their customer. What would you advise in terms of folks trying to keep their retainers from entering that spot? Because, that just obviously leads to a lot of bleed. Any advice that you can give us in general, just to make sure we don't get to that point?
My recommendation comes candidly before that interaction happens.
Yeah.
A client engagement agreement is kind of like dating before you get married. Okay. So we really want to lay out how that relationship's going to work, and you bake in those types of scenarios and make sure, there's a conversation, or an agency university, i.e. where everyone gets together and everyone's real clear on if X happens, Y happens, that sort of thing. So I think the answer is well before that intersection, if you will, and take it a step back when you do the client agreement.
Perfect, Donalyn. And so just diving a little bit deeper into that, and it's one that I understand, the rest of the group understands as well. When you're talking about sort of that pre-agreement, you're talking about that with the client as well. It's sort of like a roundtable discussion. Like this is what
Yes.
sort of the expectations are. Beautiful.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, we see that time and time again, right? Like expectations are, if you don't manage those, everything obviously goes pear-shaped very quick. I love that. That's baked in part of the process there. I'm sorry, Donalyn, did you have anything else there? Sorry, I feel like I cut you off. My apologies.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Great. Craig, any insights into that yourself?
No, I think Donna Lynn really hit it right on the head. That's the absolute best way to do it. Create those expectations up front and have it in a place where you can go back to it. Ultimately, scope creep happens because you don't set those expectations early, and then you don't want
Yeah.
to have those hard conversations later because you want to do a good job. You want the client to be happy, so you don't want to say no, I can't do that. So by doing it up front, exactly the way that Donalyn said, I mean, that is the way to kind of say, this is how our relationship is going to go. If A happens, then B happens, and so on. And that way you enter into the relationship with everyone, hopefully being on the same page.
Outstanding, folks. Much appreciate the insight, guys. Right, let's pop over to the next one here. And again, I'm going to go over to my trusty sidekick here, the man with the brain. Alec is going to take us through some of the reporting. Well, as the title says, reporting that makes you look like a genius, because we need to make sure that we're tracking. We need to make sure that we're accountable, that those expectations are there. It's really reporting that allows us to stay accountable to that. Alec, take it
Yeah,
away.
and for our hardcore attendees, Sean, you and I hosted a webinar for Function Point fairly recently on internal reporting, but let's talk about client-facing reports here. This is where we've done the work, and now we want to show its impact. So an important distinction here, reports aren't just recaps, they're retention tools. So we want to include things like what you delivered, but also why it mattered, how it tied to client goals, and next steps, what's next. So some advice here generally about these client-facing reports is you want to make these things skimmable, visual, and forwardable. I think a goal is if your client can send it to their boss without editing it, then perhaps you've nailed it. But that's just from my perspective. I'd love to turn this to our panel. I think what's an interesting question is, have you ever had a report save a client relationship? And perhaps Donna, we can start with you in this case.
I can't say that I've ever had a presentation save a relationship, but I can say that when you think about not what you want to present, but what your audience needs to see and hear, and sometimes that's not a very popular statement, what they need to see and hear. Okay, you got to think about that as well. But I have had it certainly solidify and strengthen a relationship when it's done from that perspective.
Well, maybe I can rephrase a question for Craig then. What might you include that maybe we've mentioned or we haven't mentioned to keep clients impressed month after month?
Yeah, so I actually I have a pretty good example for this. We have had situations where we will have a brand that's on a guaranteed spend, and we typically don't provide much reporting to them other than this is the current state of the money, and this is how much you have left and all that good stuff. But there were a couple of occasions where a larger entity that owns that brand kind of jumped in and said, we kind of want to see what our brand is getting. And what we did is we created this kind of big report of, this is what we've provided, this is the cost. Typically what we charge is this. So essentially, this is what you're getting for your money, and this is what the guaranteed spend has benefited you. And in those cases, two that are currently in my mind, the larger entity said this is actually fantastic, and we want to sign more of our brands up for this because the value is there. So I don't know if it saved the relationship, but it allowed us to expand what we were providing for that larger brand, for the larger entity that owned a bunch of the individual brands, and they could see this is a very tangible benefit that we're getting here.
Oh, fascinating insight. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Donna Lynn. Let's go ahead to our next slide here and kind of segue towards resource management. So let's say we've sold retainer, clients onboarded, things are going well until your team hits capacity. So this is where resource management becomes the difference between success and burnout. This part of the conversation shifts from what you sell to how you scale. And it's the operational engine that turns your promises into delivery. And without this, no retainer is sustainable. So another maybe interesting question to think of here, and I'll put this to Donna Lynn first. Have you ever had to walk away from a client because your team couldn't keep up?
We have not, but we have had to push a project or projects out by about 6 weeks. When say in Q1 when things are really, really busy. And what I try to do when I'm onboarding people is, whether it be for a project or a long-term engagement, I try to make sure that I share that possibility could happen, kind of like that client engagement conversation. But yeah, we overpromised and got stuck several times.
I mean, hindsight's 2020, but like looking back, is there something that you would have done differently, or that the agency would do differently now?
Better manage of the pipeline is probably the best thing I would suggest. Because when you get in, the challenge with a smaller company is the owner has to sell and do. And so when you sell, then you got to do. And then when you're doing, you're not selling. And that's a challenge that I think everybody has. So by managing that sell and do, I think, and leveling out your pipeline would probably be what I would have done differently.
With that in mind, Craig, I'd love to sort of pass this to you. Any thoughts on the question again about perhaps having to walk away or delay work with a client because your team couldn't keep up?
We do not. As a rule, we'll hit our deadlines, and we will suffer a little bit in the interim for it. There are times, and there's a time coming up of which we have an extremely large project, and in these cases, we have a fairly extensive freelance network that we rely on people to bring in. So our internal staff is around 90 to 100 people, and we will, expand in terms of freelance by 30, 40, sometimes an additional 50 people as needed. And luckily, we are located in Northeast Ohio, so there is a pretty large freelance community of people who we can rely on. And so without that freelance community, I don't know what we would do in these cases where we have you promised a deadline, or a client has requested a deadline that can't be moved, and we have to deliver. Without that tool of this freelance community that we can rely on, I don't know what you would do in those cases. You would have to push things out
Right.
timeline wise.
No, that's a really interesting insight. Sean, I think keeping things moving along, I'll pass it back to you for our next slide here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alec. Yeah, Donna, Lynn, that's the point you made about selling and doing. It just very much resonated with me. I always remember I had one old employer that always used to say, "You spend too much time working in the business rather than on the business."
Yes,
just
exactly.
Such a different way to put it, but thank you for that. That's my key takeaway from today. It's always lovely to hear something new. All right, folks. So a lot of the stuff that's informed this webinar today, as well as the thought leadership webinar we did back in February, are the ebooks that we put out. Now, we do have 2 ebooks that have recently been released. I believe those are going to be coming out as part of the follow-up to this webinar as well. But one is around retainers, one is around resource management. Now, a lot of what goes into these ebooks is a lot of research that we do throughout the course of the year. And we do collect things like pain points, things that are constantly being surfaced or bubbled up to us as annoyances for agencies in general. So I want to go through a few of those biggest resource pains that we're seeing throughout this year, at least, and certainly pretty much every year before that as well, to be honest with you. But this is what's been collected for this year. So over servicing, we've already talked about that. So a big thing: work gets done, it doesn't get tracked. It is great for happiness in terms of the client, but it's terrible for our margin. It's terrible in terms of burning our staff out. Bottlenecks, right? So top performers that are potentially drowning where others are underutilized. Bit of the hybrid chaos. Like, folks, let's not beat around the bush. COVID changed a lot. A lot of us are working hybrid at this point. A lot of us are working fully remote. I know with our team alone, and I know different sort of industry, but in support of yours, but we've got team members right across Canada, 5 different time zones, right? So I'm sure it's the same for a lot of you as well. Too many tools and not enough clarity. Tech stacks keep growing; they keep getting larger and larger. And in terms of forecasting, I know that's not on the slide here, but something that we always do want to bring up is, how do you forecast that need? How do you forecast that demand? So these are really what we're seeing from right across the board for folks right now. Obviously, the resourcing one is key to the conversation today. But I guess, Craig, I'll put this one to you first. Have any of these caused any sort of pain points within your group over the last year, maybe the last couple of years?
Oh yeah, bottlenecks and burnouts,
Yeah.
absolutely. So we experienced right around COVID, we experienced a couple of years of really quick growth. We went from a company of 15, 20 people to, 70, 80, and now 90 over the span of about 3 to 4 years. And in that quick growth, we realized that a lot of what we were doing was extremely reactive, right? Similar to kind of what we discussed earlier. You're just trying to make sure that you can get it done, that what you're selling is possible, and doing it so that you don't lose the client. You don't, you do it in a way that they're extremely happy. So in those cases, in that extreme growth, you're kind of just bringing people onto the team as fast as you can to get stuff done. We took about a year to then, once things kind of leveled off for us, to really look back at what we were doing and say, okay, what were the problems? What have we kind of created, and how did we scale, and how should we have scaled, and what do we need to do to make things kind of work and run a little bit smoother? And the bottlenecks and burnouts was a huge part of that, and fixing that. Um, Fixing that has taken a lot of time for us, but it has paid off in spades. And a lot of what we do in terms of resourcing and making sure that we don't get to that point where we're bottlenecking and we're burning people out has been using Function Point and some of the tools within Function Point, to allow us to kind of forecast rather than just be reactive, right? When you're reactive, you're kind of just looking in the past and you're like, oh, yeah, we got it done, but it was terrible, but there's nothing we can do about it because it's over. Now we're using Function Point in a way to look forward and say, okay, this is coming. This tidal wave is coming, and this is what we have to do. This is how we have to quickly staff up so that we don't get to the point of burning people out.
Craig, thank you so much. For the folks listening, I swear we did not pay Craig for that. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Couldn't ask for more. Really, folks, just to set the tables here, these thought leadership webinars, I mean, listen, we're a business. Of course, we want folks to come on with Function Point, with FunctionFox. But these thought leaderships are to give back. We want to make sure that we're trying to provide good, solid advice, and we're acting as good stewards for the industry in general. But I'll always take a plug when possible. So, Craig, thank you. Can't thank you enough. Donna, from your perspective, because Craig is providing us with sort of that, I don't want to say the micro lens, but he's in it every day with the agency.
Right.
You're acting as that person who is not on the outside, but you're advising dozens, if not hundreds, of agencies.
Right.
From your perspective, Donna Lynn, like, what would you say has been some of the biggest pain points for agencies? Is there anything on this list that resonates, or is it something completely different?
What we like to say is outside perspective, but inside intelligence, because all of us used to work in the biz.
Very well said. As
the fractional CFO hat that I put on at the moment, how would we not be tracking our time and knowing that we're over servicing? I completely understand that no one likes to keep time, and we all want a value add bill and all of those fabulous things, but you have to know if you're over servicing as you go. I always recommend, depending on the size of the business, that someone's taking a look at productivity on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, right? To Craig's point, you don't always want to be looking backwards, right? So you want to have the capacity, resource planning that your software actually does give you, plug or not, and and go and bring those 2 points together as you can. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And typically the bottlenecks are the leadership. My experience is the bottlenecks are the leadership, particularly in new business hands-off. So if you want to get rid of bottlenecks and burnouts, even with work or new business, I would recommend that you would do processes, right? I'm not saying that the workload isn't going to come and that's not going to happen, but I think if you have some candid conversation, because I do believe it happens with leadership a lot again, that if you do those processes, that you can mitigate some of that. And when it comes to the tools, as a software integrator, yes, tech stacks are getting more complicated, but they're also providing a whole lot more than they used to. So if you take a look at your processes and your tech stack, I think that goes a long way into managing your resource issues.
Awesome, Donna Lynn. Thank you so much. Folks, to the rest of the group here, just remember Donna Lynn, we'll make sure we have follow-up as well, but representing Agents 8, if you do have questions around that whole, tech consulting in general, like how do you make that tech stack work, or, some of these concepts that we're bringing up, Donna Lynn, not to speak for you, but I'm sure you'd welcome any sort of contact you can provide there, or context you can provide.
Oh no, I wouldn't, I'd never turn down helping people. Truly. Yeah. I'm a teacher at heart without the patience for small children. That's why I'm a consultant.
I love it. All right, folks, moving right along here. So we've talked about resourcing. This is really sort of focused around how you build that solid resourcing plan. And I think what we'll quickly see here is a lot of the points that both Craig and Donna Lynn just mentioned. They're really a part of this. So you sort of follow this flow here. The one thing that, one of the things that we constantly talk about internally, if you can't measure it, you can't fix it, right? The way that you get about measuring that in the first place is you got to audit, right? And that's auditing how things are currently working now. Also auditing once the process is done. Like you really want to make sure that you do have that full feedback loop. But if we're sort of taking a look just step by step here, first step, auditing that current state. So who's doing what, how long does it take, and where do things break? Point number 2 is really defining those roles clearly. I know from internal discussions that we've had, I think this comes up, you should be doing this at least twice a year, I'd say. But seeing what those roles look like, who's doing what, and if you notice that overlap, well, that's a conversation to have. Like, is there a reason why the overlap is taking place in the first place? So really making sure that we get clear and crisp around who's doing what. Setting those capacity benchmarks. This is something that does come up with a lot of the smaller groups that we talk to, but trying to figure out what is that right feel in terms of resourcing. Like in an ideal world, I get it. We have folks that are 100% utilized. That's not reality, right? Especially when we're talking about things like retainers. If you have somebody that is constantly set to that 100% utilization, what's happening when inevitably something takes a little bit longer, right? Like can only go so much. So you want to make sure that you're building a little bit of buffer in there. We usually recommend between 70 to 80% utilization is what should be built in. Using tools to forecast that demand. So understanding what's coming in as best you can. And if you don't have that capacity, to Donna Lynn's earlier point, hopefully you've had that conversation about the engagement beforehand. But if you don't really have that capacity, either coming up with a contingency, to Craig's point earlier, or having that hard conversation with the customer, just making sure that you're setting those boundaries. Repeatable workflows. This really comes down to that whole process piece. You don't want to overcomplicate it, but you need to make sure it's documented, and you need to make sure that it's ready in such a way that anybody can pick that up and start recreating. And last but not least, make sure you're using the right tools for your strategy. I was making this joke with Alec yesterday while we were practicing, because folks, believe it or not, we do practice these as much as we can. But I was building an IKEA desk not too long ago, and if you guys can all picture these in your head, you got the small pieces of plywood on the side, that really thin piece that goes across the back, and little tacks that go in. Well, I'm sitting there trying to nail that little tack in with the end of a screwdriver, and of course it's not working that well. You need the right tool for the job. A lot of folks will try to shoehorn something in to make it work. You really do need tools that are not necessarily tailor-made, but at least made for the challenges that you're facing. Folks, I'm going to put a quick question to the panel here. And the answer might be no, we've done all this perfectly, but we'll start with you, Donna Lynn. Anything in this process map that we're looking at here that you wish your clients would implement earlier, I guess?
Process workflows.
Yeah.
Or in addition to that, I call it gap analysis. Okay.
Yeah.
So that you can see where you want to go. Okay. So where are we in the current state? What's the impact of that? Where do we want to go? And how are we going to get there? Those are all the 4 pieces that go into any type of continuous improvement effort. So I think first is the workflows. And to your point, your workflows and your processes, your procedures are a progressive revelation, right? as the business grows, as people change, as you bring people in that might have a different understanding or learn something in a different agency. So workflows and gap analysis and all of these things are progressive revelation and should be touched, to your point, several times a year. And it should be a collective effort. It shouldn't go top down. It should go top down and bottom up.
Fantastic insight, Donlin. Couldn't agree with you more. Folks, just in the interest of time, we're just going to move through here because we do want to make sure we get to that Q&A at the end. Alec, I'm going to put it over to you for some tools that generally help the overall process and not just add clicks to that process workflow.
Yeah, and tech stack has already come up here. Let's spend another quick moment on it because tech should enable your workflow, not derail it. We've all tried tools that sound great, look great, but get abandoned within a week, either by you or by your team. So some important rules here. Your tech stack should help you assign and track work, log time, balance workload, monitor margins, report with clarity. And tools like Function Point, FunctionFox, ClickUp, Monday, Harvest, they can work, but only if your team buys in. Buy-in is critical, folks. So I think a good rule of thumb I've heard from Sean before is that if it takes more than 3 clicks or makes a junior PM cry, it's time to rethink. So I think we've got time for a quick question here. So let me ask the panel about their experiences on this. So in recent memory, what's one tool or automation that has meaningfully improved how you manage capacity or client delivery?
And this doesn't have to be Function Point or FunctionFox, folks. It can be whatever you find that has been useful.
For us, I would say ClickUp.
Yeah.
It's basically you can build it however you need it to do whatever you need it to do. So, for example, we've built it to help. I as a fractional CFO, I do people's billing. And so we created a workflow process to help us manage the back and forth, being a remote fractional CFO, to manage the billing process back and forth with this particular client. We can do forms and send out forms. And so, and that's kind of the latest thing in our tech stack. So it's kind of top of mind, but it's actually kind of cool, and it would complement what you guys do.
Well, thanks for that insight. I'll turn it over to Craig as well. Again, sort of recent memory wise, any tools or automations that have meaningfully improved things on your end?
Yeah, so I hate to give you another plug, but we typically went away from Function Point, and we tried. I sat through over hundreds of demos, and we moved to another piece of software, and really had difficulty with a lot of the basic things that we kind of took for granted while we were in Function Point. So we eventually went back to Function Point, and I think it could be any piece of software. There's a lot out there. There's everything from HubSpot to any type of CRM or sales tools, Salesforce, et cetera. Function Point and those types of ERPs or studio management software. There's a lot of stuff out there. The thing that we found most important is how they interact with each other, because that is where you save the most time and become the most efficient. So whether you have like an all-in-one software similar to what Function Point is, or you have a tech stack with a bunch of individual things that do very specific roles, the way that they integrate with each other, so you're not doubling and tripling work and having to enter it here and then re-enter it here and then import it here and export it there, the way that they kind of work all together, I think, is the biggest piece that we found, and is the most valuable, because that's where you find the most of your time savings.
Brilliant insights, both of you. And this is another question that I would love to open up to our entire audience here. Again, for all of you in recent memory, if there are any tools or automations that you've implemented as an agency that have been particularly profoundly useful, feel free to make a recommendation in the chat. We'd love to see what you're currently using. Otherwise, Sean, let's jump right ahead. Oh,
Alec,
sorry. Yeah.
yeah. Just one thing I wanted to add.
Go for it.
And we all think that we completely understand all of what our needs are, and we are hesitant to put it to paper. I think one of the best things you could, no matter what you're doing, it within your tech stack or just changes in your model, but truly dig as to what those business requirements are. And to Craig's point, make sure that all of those integrations work the way you want them to, but sit down and write down what you want project management to do, what you want capacity planning to do, what you want cash management to do, all of those things, right? And then you have a good benchmark to say yay or nay to without it being something that might be pretty, but it might not be, substantial. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and that's a good insight as well. Thank you for throwing that in.
If I could just add to that, because I
Yeah,
think
let's keep talking
actually
about this. This is great.
it's a fantastic point. And we went through that when we were going through all of these hundreds of demos and trying to find a piece of software that worked for us. If you don't have that piece that Donalyn's talking about, they'll show you the software and they'll be like, it can do all of these things. And you're like, that's great. It can do all of these things. And then you get into it and you go, so what do we do? Like, what do you start first? Where do we even begin? It can do a million things. If you have that written down or you have that plan in your head in any way, you can say, okay, this is what we need it to do. And you can start there. It becomes way less overwhelming in
Right.
setting up this whole thing. Because like I said, if you start with no plan, it can do a billion things. And then you end up just getting lost and turning everything on and you don't really know what the purpose is. Really great point.
Oh, appreciate it, both of you. Thank you so much. Sean, in the interest of time, I think we'll try to move to the next slide here. Bring us home, buddy.
Thank you so much. And Donalyn, Craig, thank you so much for engaging on that, or engaging so deeply on that last one. I myself am an ex-teacher. I got my start in education. Anytime that we start talking about explaining the why, not just the how, definitely speaks to my heart. So thank you guys so much just for bringing that up in the first place. Last thing we're going to touch on, folks, before we jump into that open Q&A is KPIs that are going to help keep you profitable. So we've talked about the retainer models at this point. We've talked about resourcing. I think a conversation that's really sort of underlaid both of those is making sure that we have good, firm processes in place to support both of those exercises. But like with anything else, you need to make sure that you have that reporting and those goals in mind to make those work in the first place. Otherwise, you're really just sort of throwing darts. You'll notice on the slide here, there's a lot of blank. There's a reason for that, folks. I didn't just forget to populate the slide. There's tons of things that we can look at on a day-to-day basis. There's a million metrics that we can pull. One thing that I've realized over the course of my leadership career is making sure that you do have a few that are really sort of crisp and crystal clear in your mind. And those are the ones that you should always be going back to. The other ones are nice to have, and they're going to inform some decisions, but there really should be a core group that you are consistently paying attention to. And I'd go so far as to say that you're referencing them at least once a day, be that via a dashboard, however you want to pull them. But these are things that you should keep at the forefront. And I mean, I've even gone so far in the past as to literally post these for whatever working group I'm a part of on a daily basis. Keeps it the front of mind for folks, keeps it the front of mind for you, and it really just works to keep everybody on target. The ones that we'd always recommend, at least from a function software point of view, are going to be that utilization rate, project profitability, on-time delivery, forecast accuracy, and team satisfaction. Like, folks, your people are your most important asset. We've mentioned this in a few webinars in the past. We're not selling goods. We're not selling trinkets from a shelf. We're selling people's time. That time is our most valuable asset. So we need to make sure that we're paying attention to that just as much as anything else. Just diving a little bit into these just to make sure that we're totally clear on the verbiage. Utilization rate. How much of your team's time is actually billable, right? Project profitability, very, very germane to the conversation around retainers. Are we actually making money off of this, or are we just burning through time? On-time delivery, are we keeping our end of the bargain? If we said it's going to be delivered this date, are we actually getting it to that date? forecast accuracy. How good are we forecasting is really what it comes down to. Are we way off? Are we way under? We want to make sure that we're getting as accurate to that as possible. And I think team satisfaction should really speak to itself. How's your team doing? Are they disengaged? Is it unclear what they should be working on? We want to make sure that we're constantly paying attention to that. Folks, that is my my stump speech, for lack of a better term. So if there's a few things you could take away, definitely this would be one slide that I'd recommend keeping at the forefront. Like, make sure that you have those KPIs crystal clear in your mind. Make sure that you're holding folks accountable to them as well as yourself. Right. Alec, I'm going to pass it over to you, and let's open it up for some Q&A for the remainder of our time. Oh, sorry, Donald.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to make a point that there's billable, i.e. they've keyed time and it is to a billable task or a billable service. But then there's billed, what you're actually invoicing the client. You need to make sure that you keep an eye on that difference between those two with either some analysis of your own or billings for full-time employee, that sort of thing.
Such an excellent point, Donald. Oftentimes gets forgot, right? But thank you so much. All right, Alec, over to you, buddy.
Great, yeah. So as Sean mentioned, this kind of is the end of our content. I know some of you did submit some great questions. We'll get to those, but we still have some opportunity here. If you do have a question for our panelists, feel free to submit it through our chat functionality right now. Now's your chance. But yeah, let's talk about a couple of the questions I've noticed in the chat here, both around retainers. So let's start with one from Amber here. She had an interesting question. In the experience of our panelists, what is the best way to position a retainer when it wasn't a solicited request?
I think in terms of that can be tricky. I think it's the way we position is getting more for less, right? So in terms of marketing and assets and content that's needed, it's immense, right? Budgets are getting smaller, staying the same, and the needs are just expanding constantly. So if you get a retainer or if you get a guaranteed spend or something along those lines, it allows you to have that security of like, I know this much is coming in. So because of that, I can work a little bit more efficiently. I can schedule a little bit more efficiently. I can get you more than I typically would because this is guaranteed. I can count on this. So whether it is, adding in services or, cutting a percentage of costs, there's benefits that you can give them that makes it an attractive offer, and it works for both parties.
Interesting response here. Donna Lynn, I have maybe a related question from Leah here about advice on how to convince clients that retainers are better for them too and not just pro agency.
Well, I mean, I don't want to be cliche, but you have to show them what the ROI is for them, right? Just like Craig said, okay, I can budget better, I can do all of those things, but what's in it for them exactly? Do you know what I mean? It's it's and this goes to new business pitches too. I really believe as an industry we could do a lot better job of when we pitch new business, telling the client, whether we're at the RFP stage or whatever, what the ROI is going to be on that to the extent that you can. So I would say that, ROI.
Well, great, Donald, thank you. And Amber and Leah, hopefully that gives you some insight into your questions here. Sean, those are the two that jumped out to me. Is there anything on your end that you've noticed in the chat or that you have in your sort of list of discussion questions?
1 second here, Alec. I'm just taking a quick skim through the chat here. And I think, you know what? Let's actually pull one from our group here. I think this is a great one. Donalyn, if it's okay with you, I'm going to start with you on this one. And we've sort of brought this up a few times just in terms of realizing and understanding that our team really is the most valuable asset that we have. How do you teach teams that you've coached in the past to respect their own time? And this is something that we, we constantly look at here as well.
Right.
Something we hear from lots of agencies. But yeah, like, how do you get that message across? It's a tough one. Like, we're caring people, right?
Okay, not to point the fingers, but let's face it, the creative department are some of our biggest time entry offenders. So, I mean, let's just be real. So I will often like get with the creative folks, no leadership in the room, just us. And I will literally write on the board, okay, so truthfully, guys, how much time do you really just forget to enter and guess and all that? And, let's say it's 15 minutes a day. So I say, okay, 15 minutes a day times 5 days a week times 52 weeks a year. And I show them how much of their talent they're giving away for free. And that makes it that seems to work, believe it or not. Here is the amount of your talent that you are giving away for free. No one's getting any money for that. Not you, not the business, nothing. You're just going, here's my intellectual capital for free. That's what I do.
That's such an incredible way to put that, Donalyn. Yeah,
it works. You wouldn't think it works. It works.
Definitely going to steal that. Craig, from your experience working with your group, have you encountered the same piece? Like, is there any sort of tips or tricks you can give us to help those folks just really value their own time?
Yeah, so value your own time in terms of the business, or value their own time in terms of their personal lives, I think
Right.
are two separate cases. We have, because we're a little bit larger of an agency, we can build that infrastructure so that the artists on themselves are not really responsible for what their schedule looks like. It's more on our traffic managers, who are kind of just pushing things and saying, okay, these are the projects, these are the deadlines, and then you figure that out within that context. And I think there are times where you may have to work a little bit longer to hit those deadlines, or finish whatever that project is. But then we always make sure, on a company level, on the management side, to give that time back to our team. We understand that there are going to be situations where you're working a lot, and that is an expense of your personal time. We want to make sure that in those times where maybe we're not as busy, we can get you a summer Friday, or we can get you a little bit
Right.
time back as kind of a thank you to the time that you really put all of your, a little bit of an expense of your personal time given to the company. So I think those are a way of just showing that the company values your personal time, and we'll give that back to you. And in a way, hopefully that allows them to kind of realize that that's the way it should be, that they should be thinking about things, maybe.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Craig. Love hearing the two different perspectives, or not even different perspectives, just sort of from the different angles, I guess. But yeah, it really comes down to just making sure that people understand that, at the end of the day, time is really all we got, right? Like, that is
Right.
the most valuable resource that we have. Folks, one really great one that's popped up here in the panel. And Craig, I'm going to put this to you first, if that's okay with you. But
Sure.
we have Heidi asking about value tiers in terms of retainers, and what does that look like for your group? I guess, Craig, starting with you, do you have any experience with that, or any insight that you could provide there?
Yeah, so value tiers to us is probably, I don't know if it's going to end up being what Heidi is looking for. Maybe it is. I don't know. But the value tiers to us is the type of a project. So really, it is, are you creating a video that's going to live on your website, or is this a broadcast shoot that is going to be, displayed across the country on any means of advertising, or television stations, or whatever the case may be. So in those cases, the value tier is the cost of the project, right? And it is the type of project that you're shooting. So a lot of that for us is kind of figured out in the estimating phase, and it really determines the type of project we're doing. And a lot of times that's brought to us. We're not providing the value tier to them. So I guess, a typical value tier that I think of is like, you go to a software service, and, you're going to pick personal, pro, or business or whatever. We don't really have that type of thing. Our thing is, where is the need? Where are you going to use it? And then based on that, is it a big time Super Bowl commercial, or is it, a smaller web video or Facebook video or something like that? I don't know if that answers the question. I apologize if it doesn't, Heidi.
Craig, I think definitely provides some great insight there. Donalyn, did you have anything from your perspective to speak to that?
Yeah, well, in my head, when I think about tiers, I'm thinking about client levels. Okay, so you've got client level A, B, and C. So an A level client might be whatever benchmark in dollars you want to set. Okay, so 250,000 a year, and the next tier is 100,000 a year, and the next tier is $50,000 a year. So it runs in a rate. Well, it's kind of like the way you tiered it. You've got the strategy and all of that, and then at the bottom, you've got more of the tactics and execution. So in my head, the value tiers are more about where the client falls as opposed to the executables, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Perfect. Donalyn, thank you so much. Heidi, hopefully that answers your questions there, or at least provides some further insight for you. Folks, we're just about at time here. The one thing I did just want to note here, Leah, you threw something in here at the very end of the chat, and just want to highlight that for the group. Sort of going back to that value in your time piece. So Leah here is confirming that just really sort of laying out what that time looks like, that 15 minutes a day that Donalyn mentioned. That helped them to realize an extra 3% in terms of revenue, which is outstanding. Like just one of those little tiny things that you can do on a weekly basis that really just sort of drives home the importance. And the offshoot of that is material, right? Like we actually gain some real material value there. So Leah, thank you so much for providing that example. Wonderful to hear. Folks, that's about it for today. Great engagement. Thank you so much. I want to really thank our panelists. Again, that's Craig Cardellino from TRG and Donalyn Johnson from Agents 8. Folks, can't thank you enough for just being with us today and giving some of your time. It is really valuable. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Ciao.
No, my pleasure. And Alec, as always, thank you, my friends. We will be sending out follow-up for this over the next day or so. And again, folks, if there's any questions and you are current customers of Function Point or FunctionFox, please reach out to your CSMs. That's what we're here for. We're here to help. If you are new to our family, certainly reach out to our team. We're always happy to have a chat. Thanks, everybody. Hope you all have a wonderful Thursday. Wherever you are in the world, stay warm or stay cool. God knows the temperature's up and down these days, but we hope to see you at the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day, folks.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.